At the Long Beach Municipal Auditorium in the fall of 1988, 2,400 seats were filled to the back row for the open weight division final of Ed Parker's International Karate Championships, the same tournament where Bruce Lee had demonstrated the one-inch punch in 1964, the same arena where Chuck Norris had fought his way to 6 world titles through the late 60s. Ed Parker was standing at the announcer's table in a dark suit with a clipboard in his hand and a look on his face that suggested he had already seen something that evening he had not been expecting to see. The open weight final was the last event of the night. The arena lights were the flat industrial kind that made everything on the mat look slightly more real than it needed to. Chuck Norris was sitting in Section B, third row center, in a brown leather jacket and khaki slacks. He was 48 years old. He had been retired from competition for nearly 2 decades, but he still came to Long Beach every year because Ed Parker had asked him to, and because Chuck Norris did not break commitments. He had his arms crossed, and his expression was the one he wore for everything, which was no expression at all. Beside him sat Bob Wall, 6'1", 210 pounds, 3-time international karate champion, and Chuck's training partner of 22 years. Bob had a program rolled up in his right hand, and he was tapping it slowly against his knee the way a man taps something when he is watching a situation develop and is not yet sure what the situation is going to become. The situation was a 24-year-old fighter named Victor Reigns. He had come out of the Tenshin Dojo in West Hollywood, which was Steven Seagal's school, and he had come through the bracket like a man who had somewhere else to be and wanted to get there quickly. 3 matches, 3 finishes. The first 2 by referee stoppage after combinations that were fast enough and clean enough that the judges did not need a replay. The third, the semi-final, against a 220-pound Shotokan black belt out of Phoenix named David Carrera, had ended in 34 seconds. Victor had slipped Carrera's lead hand, stepped offline at a 30-degree angle, and delivered a ridge hand strike to the side of the neck, followed by a sweep that put Carrera flat on his back on the mat with the particular sound a 220-pound body makes when it lands on canvas from standing height and is not expecting to. Carrera had stayed down for 6 seconds. He was not unconscious. He was recalibrating. The arena had made the sound that arenas make when they have just watched something that happened too fast for the front rows to process and too clean for the back rows to believe. Victor Reigns was 6'3", 225 pounds, blonde hair cut short, blue eyes, jaw built the way jaws are built on men who have been hit enough times that the bone has opinions about it. He had started Aikido under Seagal at 15 at the original dojo on Santa Monica Boulevard when Haruo Matsuoka was still the chief instructor and the school still smelled like old mats and tiger balm. By 18, he had his 3rd dan in Aikido. By 20, he had crossed into Kyokushin and earned his first dan under a Japanese instructor in Torrance, whose name most American karate practitioners did not know, and whose students most American karate practitioners did not want to fight. By 22, he had entered the full contact circuit in California and had not lost. His record coming into Long Beach that night was 14 fights, 14 wins, 11 by stoppage. He fought the way men fight when they have been trained in a system that emphasizes redirection and then retrained in a system that emphasizes destruction. The Aikido gave him angles. The Kyokushin gave him what to do when he arrived at them. The final paired Victor against a 28-year-old American Kenpo stylist named Marcus Bell out of Sacramento, who was the defending champion and who had held the open weight title for 2 consecutive years. Bell was 6 feet, 195 pounds, fast hands, excellent footwork, the kind of fighter who made Kenpo look like what Ed Parker had always intended Kenpo to look like. The arena expected a competitive final. The arena expected 2 experienced fighters to work through 3 rounds and give the judges something to score. The arena got 1 minute and 52 seconds. Victor came forward from the opening bow with the same straight-line pressure he had used all night. Bell circled left and threw a back fist that would have scored in any point karate tournament in the country. Victor was not in point karate. He took the back fist on his forearm without changing expression, stepped inside Bell's follow-up roundhouse and delivered a short right cross to the solar plexus that the microphones at Matt's side picked up. Bell folded, not dramatically, not the way fighters fold in films. He folded the way a man folds when the air has left his body and his legs have not yet received the message that the fight is continuing without them. The referee stepped in. Bell's corner stepped in. Victor stepped back with his hands at his sides and waited. Ed Parker walked the trophy out. What happened next is the reason 2,400 people in that arena would remember that Saturday night for the rest of their lives. Victor took the trophy from Ed Parker with his left hand. It was 2.5 feet of brass and black marble, and it caught the overhead lights as he lifted it. He held it at his side the way a man holds a bag of groceries, not the way a champion holds a trophy. He did not raise it for the photographers. He did not bow to the judges' table. He turned and looked at the announcer's stand at the edge of the mat, and he walked toward it. Ed Parker saw him walking, and Ed Parker had been running this tournament for 24 years, and he knew what a fighter walking toward the announcer's stand after a final looked like when that fighter had something to say that was not thank you. Parker moved to intercept, but Victor was already there. He picked up the microphone from the table with his right hand, the trophy still hanging in his left, and the feedback squeal that came through the speakers was the sound of 2,400 people's evening changing direction. He spoke clearly. His voice was calm in the way that voices are calm when the person speaking has rehearsed what he is about to say enough times that the words have lost their nervousness, but not their edge. He thanked Ed Parker first. He thanked the judges. He thanked his training partners at the Tenshin Dojo. And he thanked Sensei Seagal for the foundation. He said the right things for about 40 seconds, and the arena listened the way an arena listens when it can hear in a man's voice that the right things are about to end and the real thing is about to begin. Then Victor said that he had grown up watching American martial arts on television. He said he had grown up watching Walker, Texas Ranger on Saturday nights with his father in a living room in Culver City, and that his father had told him that the man on the screen was the greatest fighter in America. He said he had believed his father. He paused. He said he had believed his father until he started training, until he learned what real contact felt like, until he understood the difference between a man who fights for points and a man who fights to finish. He said that point karate, the system Chuck Norris had built his 6 titles on, was a game played by men who were afraid to get hit. The arena noise changed. It went from the murmur of polite attention to the low frequency hum that 2,400 people generate when they have collectively inhaled and not yet decided whether to exhale as anger or excitement. Victor was not finished. He turned his body 45 degrees towards Section B, and he did not have to search for the face because he had known where it was since he walked out for the semi-final 3 hours earlier. He looked directly at Chuck Norris. 3rd row center, brown leather jacket, arms still crossed. He said, "Mr. Norris, I respect what you did for this sport. I respect what you did for karate in America. But what you did was not fighting. What you did was acting. You acted in tournaments the same way you act in your movies. You touched a man and the referee said stop, and they gave you a trophy and everybody went home thinking they had seen a fight." He let the silence work for exactly the length of time a man lets silence work when he has been taught by someone who understands that silence after an insult is louder than the insult itself. Then he said, "You are sitting right there. You are 15 feet from this mat. I am 24 years old. I am the open weight champion of this tournament as of 4 minutes ago. I will not ask for 3 rounds. I will not ask for 2. 1 round, 3 minutes. Full contact. No points. And I think 3 minutes is more than enough time for me to show everyone in this building that your titles were earned in a game and not in a fight." He said the last word, fight, with the slight emphasis that a man puts on a word when he wants the word to land on a specific person in a specific seat in a specific row. The 2,400 people in the Long Beach Municipal Auditorium made the noise. Not the noise of cheering, and not the noise of booing. The specific noise of a large number of human beings simultaneously processing the fact that what they are watching has departed from every script they brought into the building. Ed Parker had the expression of a man who had spent 24 years building a tournament and was watching a 24-year-old take a hammer to the glass case it was kept in. He was moving toward Victor. 2 officials were moving with him. Bob Wall had stopped tapping the program against his knee. He was leaning in toward Chuck and saying something that only Chuck could hear, and that Bob Wall would later describe to close friends as the two shortest sentences he had ever spoken to his training partner of 22 years. He said, "Don't." And then, because he knew Chuck Norris and had known him for 22 years, he said, "Please." Chuck did not look at Bob. He had not taken his eyes off Victor Raines since Victor had picked up the microphone. His arms were still crossed. His face had not changed. He uncrossed his arms slowly. He placed both hands on his knees. He leaned forward approximately 3 inches, which was the distance between sitting in a chair and deciding to stand up from one. The 2,400 people who were watching him understood what 3 inches of forward movement meant. The noise in the arena doubled. Chuck turned his head toward Bob Wall and said something. He said it at the volume that men use when they are saying something that is meant for one person and not for a building. Bob Wall would tell the story many times over the years that followed. He would tell it in dojos and at seminars, and at the kind of private dinners where old martial artists sit around a table and trade the moments that made them. He would tell it the same way every time, because Bob Wall was a man who believed that a story told differently each time was a story that had been contaminated by the teller. What Chuck said to him in Section B, third row center at the Long Beach Municipal Auditorium on that Saturday night in the fall of 1988 was this. He said, "Bob, that boy just made 2 mistakes. The first one was picking up the microphone. The second one is that he thinks this is about fighting." Bob did not respond. He did not need to. He had trained with Chuck Norris for 22 years, and he understood that when Chuck described someone's mistakes in a calm voice, what he was actually describing was a lesson plan. Chuck stood up. The noise in the arena went vertical. It rose so fast and so high that the sound technician at the back of the hall pulled his headphones off one ear because the levels had jumped past what the board was calibrated for. 2,400 people were on their feet before Chuck had finished standing, not because they wanted a fight, because they wanted to see what was going to happen next. And the difference between those two things is the difference between a crowd and a congregation. Chuck stepped over the low railing that separated Section B from the floor. He did it the way a 48-year-old man steps over a railing when his knees have 20 years of competition damage in them, but his balance has not forgotten what it was built on. He landed softly on the arena floor in his brown leather jacket and his khaki slacks and his brown lace-up shoes that were not designed for walking on a martial arts mat, and were certainly not designed for what 2,400 people believed was about to happen on one. Ed Parker reached him first. Parker put a hand on Chuck's shoulder and leaned in and said something. Chuck listened. He nodded once. Parker stepped back. Whatever Parker had said to him, the nod had been the answer, and Parker had accepted it because Ed Parker had known Chuck Norris since the 1960s, and he knew what a nod meant from a man who did not waste language. Chuck walked toward the mat. He did not walk quickly, and he did not walk slowly. He walked at the pace of a man who was covering a distance he had covered thousands of times before, and who did not need to adjust his speed because he already knew exactly how many steps it would take. Victor Raines was standing in the center of the mat with the trophy at his feet and the microphone still in his right hand. He watched Chuck approaching, and something crossed his face. It was not fear. It was not doubt. It was the expression of a young man who has just realized that the thing he asked for is the thing he is about to receive, and that the distance between asking and receiving is shorter than he had calculated. He set the microphone down on the announcer's table. He rolled his shoulders once. He dropped into a fighting stance, left foot forward, hands high. The Kyokushin guard that he had been trained in and that had worked for him 14 consecutive times against 14 consecutive opponents. Chuck stopped at the edge of the competition area. He looked at Victor for approximately 4 seconds. 4 seconds is not a long time, unless 2,400 people are watching you spend them, in which case 4 seconds contains enough silence to fill a cathedral. Then he did something that nobody in the building had expected. He took off his leather jacket. He folded it once carefully, the way a man folds a jacket when the jacket matters to him, and when he is in no hurry, despite the fact that every person in the room is in a hurry on his behalf. He handed it to the nearest official. Underneath was a plain grey polo shirt, tucked into the khaki slacks. He looked down at his shoes. He unlaced the left one first, then the right. He placed them side by side next to the official. He pulled off his socks, folded each one, and placed them inside the shoes. He was barefoot now on the concrete apron at the edge of the mat. 48 years old, grey polo shirt, khaki slacks, no GI, no belt, no tape on his hands, no mouthguard. The arena had gone from noise to something quieter than noise. It had gone to the particular frequency that a large room full of people generates when every person in it has stopped performing the act of being an audience and has become instead a witness. Ed Parker walked to the center of the mat. He looked at Victor. He looked at Chuck. He had the expression of a man who was about to officiate something that was not in the tournament program and that would never be in any tournament program, because what was about to happen existed in the space between competition and something older than competition. He raised his right hand. He said, "Unscheduled exhibition, 1 round, 3 minutes, full contact rules, Dolph." He caught himself. He closed his eyes for half a second in the way a man closes his eyes when his mouth has just said a word his brain did not authorize. He corrected himself. He said, "Victor Reigns, Tenshin Dojo West Hollywood Openweight Champion versus Chuck Norris." He did not add titles. He did not add credentials. He said the name the way you say a name that does not need anything after it. The arena understood. The name was enough. Parker lowered his hand. He said, "Fight." Victor came forward the way Kyokushin fighters come forward. Straight, direct, weight-centered, left jab to establish range, followed immediately by a right low kick aimed at the outside of Chuck's left thigh. The combination was technically excellent. The jab was sharp and the low kick carried the rotation of a man who had been throwing low kicks since he was old enough to reach another man's thigh. Chuck was not at the end of either one. He had moved before Victor's jab hand had fully extended. Not backward, sideways. A half step to his right that changed his position by maybe 14 inches, and that put him at the exact angle where Victor's jab found air, and Victor's low kick swept past the space where Chuck's thigh had been a quarter second earlier. Victor reset. He came forward again. Right cross hard, aimed at the center line. Chuck's head moved approximately 3 inches to the left. The cross went past his right ear close enough that the people in the first 2 rows could see Victor's knuckles past the line of Chuck's jaw without touching it. Chuck did not counter. He did not step back. He stood exactly where he was, with his hands at belt height, open, palms facing the mat, the way a man stands when he is not preparing to fight, but is instead preparing to teach. The next 45 seconds were Victor throwing and Chuck being somewhere else. Left roundhouse to the body. Chuck checked it with his right shin, absorbing the impact without shifting his weight. Right hook to the head. Chuck pulled his chin back exactly far enough that the hook passed in front of his nose by what looked from the 3rd row like 1.5 inches. Spinning back kick, full commitment, the technique that had ended the semi-final against Carrera in 34 seconds. Chuck stepped inside the arc of the kick before it reached full extension, and the kick wrapped around the back of his shoulder like a vine wrapping around a post that was not interested in moving. Victor's own momentum carried him 15 degrees past the center line, and for 1/2 of 1 second he was facing the wrong direction, with his back partially turned to a man who could have ended the exhibition in that half second with any one of 6 techniques that Chuck Norris had been practicing since before Victor Reigns had been born. Chuck did not throw any of them. He waited. Victor recovered his stance, reset his guard, and came forward again. 1 minute, 15 seconds had passed. Victor had thrown 11 strikes. None of them had landed cleanly. Chuck had thrown nothing. The people in the arena were beginning to understand something. The experienced martial artists in the building, the black belts sitting in clusters of 3 and 4 throughout the sections, had begun to see it first. They were seeing a man who was not fighting. They were seeing a man who was taking a 24-year-old apart the way a mechanic takes apart an engine, not to break it, but to show each piece to the room. Every time Victor attacked, Chuck's response demonstrated a principle. The first principle was distance. Chuck existed at a range that was 6 inches too far for Victor's punches to reach and 6 inches too close for Victor's kicks to develop full power. The second principle was timing. Chuck moved after Victor committed, but before Victor's technique arrived, not during, after the decision and before the result. The window between those 2 moments is approximately 1/4 of a second, and Chuck Norris lived inside that 1/4 second the way other men live inside a house. The third principle was the one the black belts in the audience understood but could not easily explain to the white belts sitting next to them. It was the principle of invitation. Chuck was not avoiding Victor's attacks. He was selecting them. Every position Chuck took, every angle he offered, was designed to make Victor choose a specific attack. And when Victor chose it, Chuck was already standing in the place where that specific attack could not reach. Victor was not losing a fight. Victor was performing a choreography that he did not know he was performing, directed by a man who was writing each movement half a second before Victor danced it. 1 minute, 45 seconds. Victor stopped. He stood in the center of the mat, breathing hard through his nose, with his hands still raised and his eyes locked on the 48-year-old man in the grey polo shirt, who was standing 7 feet away from him, and who was not breathing hard, and who had not raised his hands once. Something was happening behind Victor's eyes. It was the particular kind of recalculation that happens in a fighter's brain when the model he brought into the ring does not match the data the ring is giving him. He had come onto this mat with a model that said the man across from him was a 48-year-old retired point fighter in street clothes. The data said something else. The data said that the man across from him had not made a single unnecessary movement in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The data said that every attack Victor had launched had been anticipated, not reacted to, but anticipated, read before it began the way a man reads a sentence he has already written. The data said that the 48-year-old man in the grey polo shirt was not slower than Victor. He was faster. Not faster in the way that young men are fast, which is the speed of muscle and reflex. Faster in the way that only comes from decades, which is the speed of knowing what is going to happen before it happens, because you have seen every version of it 10,000 times, and the body in front of you is not showing you anything new. Victor was 24 years old and undefeated, and the best fighter in the building by every metric that can be printed on a tournament bracket. The man across from him was none of those things except the last one, and the last one was the only one that mattered. Victor came forward again. But the way he came forward had changed. The first 1 minute and 45 seconds he had come forward the way a hunter comes forward, aggressive, committed, closing distance to kill. Now he came forward the way a man comes forward when he is no longer certain what he is walking into. The Kyokushin stance was still there, but the certainty behind it had developed a fracture. He threw a left jab. It was 15% slower than the jab he had thrown at the start, and Chuck saw the 15% the way a piano tuner hears a note that is a quarter tone flat. Chuck slipped it the same way he had slipped the others, but this time he did something different. He countered. For the first time in 1 minute and 50 seconds, Chuck Norris initiated an offensive movement. It was not a punch. It was not a kick. It was a step. 1 step forward. His right foot moved maybe 10 inches closer to Victor, and his left foot followed to reset his base, and the total distance closed was less than a foot. But the effect of that single step on Victor Reigns was more visible than any strike thrown in the entire tournament that day. Victor flinched. Not a large flinch. Not the kind of flinch you see in a man who is afraid. The kind of flinch you see in a man whose nervous system has just reclassified the person in front of him from opponent to threat. It was involuntary. It lasted 1/10 of a second, and 2,400 people saw it. The arena made a sound. It was low, and it came from the chest, and it was the sound of 2,400 people who had just watched a 24-year-old undefeated champion flinch at a step taken by a 48-year-old man in khaki slacks. The black belts in the audience understood what had just happened at a level the casual spectators did not. What had happened was that Chuck had spent 1 minute and 45 seconds establishing himself as something Victor's nervous system could not predict. And when a fighter's nervous system cannot predict the man in front of him, it begins to reclassify that man. The reclassification is not conscious. It happens below thought, in the part of the brain that was keeping humans alive long before humans learned to think. The flinch was the visible evidence of that reclassification. Victor's conscious mind still believed he was fighting a retired 48-year-old in street clothes. Victor's survival brain had already updated the file. 2 minutes. Chuck took another step, not forward this time, to his left, a lateral step that put him at Victor's 10 o'clock position. Victor turned to track him, and as he turned, Chuck took another step, this time forward and to the right, and now he was at Victor's 2 o'clock. Victor turned again. Chuck stepped again. 3 steps in 4 seconds, and Chuck had moved from directly in front of Victor to a position where Victor had to keep rotating to find him, and the rotation was costing Victor his base and his balance and his ability to launch anything with full power. What Chuck was doing had a name in the old Okinawan systems. It was called Tai Sabaki, body management, the art of using angles and footwork to control where the other man is looking, and therefore what the other man can do. Every martial art teaches some version of it. Almost no one performs it the way Chuck Norris was performing it on that mat, because performing it at that level requires something that cannot be taught in a seminar or written in a manual. It requires the particular kind of spatial intelligence that comes from spending 35 years on a competition floor and absorbing through repetition what distance means when distance is the difference between being hit and not being hit. 2 minutes, 15 seconds. Victor had stopped chasing. He was standing near the center of the mat, breathing through his mouth now, not his nose, which was the first visible sign that the gas tank was no longer full. His hands were still up, but they were 2 inches lower than they had been at the start. 2 inches does not sound like much. In a full contact fight, 2 inches of hand drop is the difference between a guard and a suggestion. Chuck saw the 2 inches. He saw them the way a surgeon sees the moment a procedure shifts from routine to critical. He did not rush toward the opening the way a younger fighter would have. He waited. He let Victor stand there with his hands 2 inches too low and his lungs working 30% harder than they had been at the start. He let the arena see it. He let the black belts in the audience catalogue it. He let Victor feel it. Because the lesson Chuck Norris was teaching on that mat was not a lesson about striking or blocking or kicking. It was a lesson about time. Specifically, it was a lesson about what happens to a man when he realizes that time is not on his side, and that every second that passes is a second in which the gap between what he believed about himself and what is actually true gets wider by an amount he cannot close. Victor had walked onto this mat believing he had 3 minutes to prove something. He was now discovering that 3 minutes was not a gift he had given Chuck Norris. It was a sentence Chuck Norris had allowed him to begin serving, 2 minutes 20 seconds. Victor committed. He threw the technique he had been saving, the one he had not shown all night, the one that fighters hold in reserve the way a poker player holds a card he believes will change the game. Right leg roundhouse kick, head height, thrown off the rear leg with the full torque of a 225-pound frame, rotating through 180 degrees. The same category of kick that had ended Carrera in the semi-final. The same category of kick that had ended 11 of his 14 professional fights by stoppage. It was fast. It was technically perfect. The shin was on a trajectory to arrive at the left side of Chuck's head with approximately 900 pounds of force behind it, which is enough force to end a conversation and begin a medical event. Chuck did not duck. He did not lean back. He stepped forward, into the kick, toward it, closing the distance between himself and the incoming shin by approximately 18 inches in a quarter of a second. The geometry of a roundhouse kick requires distance to generate power. At full extension, the kick carries maximum force. At half extension, it carries half. At the distance Chuck had closed to, the kick had not yet reached the part of its arc where it becomes dangerous. Victor's shin hit Chuck's raised left forearm at maybe 40% of its intended force. The sound was sharp, but not heavy. A book dropped on a wooden table, not a bat hitting a watermelon. Chuck's forearm absorbed it. His feet did not move. What happened in the next second and a half is the sequence that the 2,400 people in the Long Beach Municipal Auditorium would describe to other people for the next 37 years. Chuck's left hand, the same forearm that had just absorbed the roundhouse, rolled over Victor's shin and closed around his ankle. Not grabbed, closed, the way a door closes, with the mechanical certainty of something that was always going to end up in this position because the man operating it had already decided it would. Victor's right leg was now extended and held at chest height by a 48-year-old man in a grey polo shirt who had one hand on Victor's ankle and whose other hand was at his own side, open, relaxed, as if he were holding a railing on a Sunday walk. Victor was standing on one leg. His base leg, the left, was bearing all 225 pounds of his weight plus the forward momentum of the kick he had just thrown. Chuck looked at him. He looked at him for approximately 1 full second, which in a fight is long enough to read a paragraph. Then Chuck dropped his own weight 6 inches by bending his knees and delivered a side kick to the inside of Victor's planted left knee. He did not throw it hard. He threw it at the force a man uses when he is pushing open a door that is already ajar. But Victor was not a door. Victor was 225 pounds balanced on one leg, with his centre of gravity committed to a kick that was no longer travelling, and his planted knee absorbing a lateral force it was not designed to absorb from an angle it was not prepared to receive. Victor went down, not the way a fighter goes down when he has been knocked out, the way a building goes down when the foundation has been removed from one corner. His left knee buckled inward, his body followed. He landed on his left side on the mat, with the sound that a man of that size makes when he arrives at the ground from a standing position without any part of his body prepared for the landing. The trophy he had won 8 minutes earlier was still sitting at the edge of the mat where he had left it. From where Victor was lying, he could see it. 2 feet of brass and black marble, catching the flat industrial lights of the Long Beach Municipal Auditorium, the way trophies catch light when they are sitting on the ground waiting for someone to pick them up and no one is reaching for them. Chuck stepped back. He did not step back quickly, and he did not step back with any visible emotion on his face. He stepped back the way a man steps back from a workbench when the work is finished and the tools are where they belong. His hands were at his sides, open, relaxed, the same position they had been in for most of the 3 minutes. He had thrown exactly one offensive technique in the entire exhibition. One, a side kick to the inside of a planted knee, thrown at maybe 30% of what a side kick from Chuck Norris was capable of delivering. He had not punched Victor Reigns. He had not kicked him in the head. He had not knocked him out. He had taken 225 pounds of undefeated 24-year-old full-contact champion and placed it on the mat using nothing but timing, angle, and the particular kind of patience that a man develops when he has spent 35 years learning that the fastest way to end a confrontation is to never be in a hurry to end it. Victor was on the mat. He was not hurt. His knee was not injured. His body was intact. What was damaged was something that does not show up on an X-ray and does not require a doctor. What was damaged was the model, the internal architecture of certainty that a 24-year-old undefeated fighter carries into every room he walks into, and that tells him, before any evidence is collected, that he is the most dangerous person in that room. That architecture had just been disassembled in 2 minutes and 26 seconds by a man who had not raised his voice, had not raised his hands above his waist until the final 4 seconds, and had treated the entire encounter with the calm, procedural attention of a man returning a library book. Victor stayed on the mat for approximately 3 seconds, not because he could not get up, because he was processing. The processing took 3 seconds because what he was processing was not the fall. What he was processing was the 2 minutes and 26 seconds that had preceded the fall. Every moment of it, every jab that had missed by 3 inches, every kick that had landed on a forearm instead of a skull, every step Chuck had taken that had put Victor in a position he did not choose to be in. The fall was not the lesson. The fall was the punctuation at the end of the lesson. The lesson was everything that had come before it. He got up. He stood in the center of the mat, and he looked at Chuck Norris, who was standing 8 feet away, with his hands at his sides, and who was looking back at him with the same expression he had been wearing when he was sitting in Section B, 3rd row center, 2.5 minutes earlier. The expression that said nothing and contained everything. Ed Parker had not called the bell. The clock on the officials' table said 2 minutes 31 seconds. There were 29 seconds remaining. Victor could have continued. He could have reset his guard and come forward again, and tried to land something in the remaining 29 seconds that would have justified the speech he had made, and the microphone he had taken, and the challenge he had issued in front of 2,400 people. He did not. He did something else. He straightened his GI. He placed his feet together. He put his hands at his sides, and he bowed. Not the quick, competitive bow that fighters exchange before a match when they are thinking about the first combination they are going to throw, the deep formal bow that a student gives to a teacher when the student has just learned something that he did not know he needed to learn. The bow lasted 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, The arena was completely silent. 2,400 people watching a 24-year-old man bend at the waist toward a 48-year-old man, and not a single one of them making a sound, because every person in that building understood what the bow meant. The bow meant that the conversation that had started with a microphone and a challenge was over, and that the man who had started it was the one ending it, and that he was ending it in the only language that a martial artist uses when words are no longer adequate. Chuck bowed back. Not the same bow. A shorter one. The bow of an equal acknowledging a moment, not the bow of a teacher receiving submission. The difference between those two bows contained more information than everything that had been said into the microphone 3 minutes earlier. Then Chuck walked forward. He extended his right hand. Victor took it. Chuck pulled him in, not into a hug, not into an embrace, but into the specific distance that men stand at when they are about to say something meant for one set of ears. Their faces were approximately 8 inches apart. Chuck said something. He said it quietly enough that only Victor heard it, and that the referee standing 4 feet away later told people he saw Chuck's lips move but did not hear the words. The two men stood like that for approximately 3 seconds. Then Chuck released Victor's hand and stepped back. The arena stood, all of it. 2,400 people rising from their seats, not in the sudden way a crowd rises. When a knockout happens, but in the slow collective way, a congregation rises. When something sacred has just concluded. They were not cheering, they were applauding. The specific kind of applause that does not come from excitement, but from recognition. The recognition that what they had just watched was not a fight. It was not an exhibition. It was not a contest between two men. It was a conversation conducted entirely in movement, and the conversation had said something that 2,400 people understood in their bodies before they understood it in their minds. Chuck walked back across the mat. He picked up his jacket from the official. He did not put it on. He folded it over his left arm. He picked up his shoes and his socks in his right hand. He walked barefoot across the arena floor toward Section B. Bob Wool was standing at the railing. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Chuck stepped over the railing back into the seats, sat down, crossed his arms, and looked straight ahead at the empty mat, the way a man looks at a job he has finished and does not intend to discuss. Ed Parker stood at the center of the mat with the microphone in his hand. He opened his mouth to say something, and then he closed it. He stood there for approximately 2 seconds with 2,400 people watching him not speak. Then he simply said, "Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes tonight's program." He did not describe what had happened. He did not name a winner. He did not attempt to frame it. He understood, the way only a man who has spent his life in martial arts understands, that some things are diminished by the act of explaining them. Victor Reyners left the mat carrying his trophy. He walked through the tunnel that led to the dressing area, and he sat down on a metal folding chair, and he did not speak to anyone for a long time. His cornerman brought him water in a paper cup. His second brought him a towel. Neither of them asked him what Chuck had said to him on the mat, because both of them had seen his face when he stepped back from the handshake, and both of them understood that whatever had been said was not something Victor was ready to share. He sat on that metal folding chair for 40 minutes after the arena had emptied. When he finally stood up and walked out to the parking lot, the November air hit his face, and he stood there under the sodium lights with his gym bag over his shoulder and the trophy in his hand, and he looked at the trophy for a long time, the way a man looks at something whose meaning has just fundamentally changed. Chuck Norris drove home alone. He took the 405 North to the 101 West, and he drove to his place on Woodman Avenue in Sherman Oaks. There was no press conference. There was no interview. He did not call anyone. He made himself dinner, and he went to bed. At the time he always went to bed, because Chuck Norris did not treat extraordinary days any differently than he treated ordinary ones, and that was part of the reason the extraordinary days happened in the first place. The next morning, the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner gave the exhibition 6 lines in the sports section on page 11, and misspelled Victor's last name. The reporter had filed the story from the press box during the heavyweight semi-final and had not been at matside for the exhibition. The story spread anyway. It moved through dojos, through phone calls between instructors, through the particular network that connected serious martial artists in 1988 the way social media connects everyone now. Within 6 weeks, every major Aikido and Kyokushin school on the West Coast had heard some version of it. The versions disagreed on details. They agreed on essentials. Victor Reigns did not compete again after Long Beach. He returned to the Tenshin Dojo and trained there for another year before moving to a small school in Ventura that taught traditional Okinawan karate. He stopped giving interviews about his fighting career. He opened his own dojo in 2003 in Thousand Oaks. He taught children's classes in the mornings and adult classes in the evenings, and he never hung the Long Beach trophy on the wall of his school. He kept it in a box in the back office. He was asked about it once by a student who had found it while helping clean the storage room. Victor looked at the trophy and told the student that the trophy was from the night he learned the most important lesson of his martial arts career. The student asked what the lesson was. Victor said that the lesson was that a real fighter does not need to tell you he is one. The student asked who taught him that. Victor said a man in a grey polo shirt and khaki slacks who threw one kick in 3 minutes and changed everything he thought he knew about what it meant to be strong. He did not say the man's name. He did not need to. In that dojo in Thousand Oaks, in every dojo in the country, there was only one man that story could have been about, and his name did not need to be said, because the name was the kind of name that fills a room by itself the way light fills a room when someone opens the curtain, the kind of name that lands without being thrown.